Thank you everyone for coming to our session. So today we have David Hockridge from the University of Technology, Sydney. He's the head of data managed services there, and he's been with UTS for 4 years. Now before that, he was in Qantas in a similar role for about 16 years. And he just mentioned to me that because of Ben's introduction speech of the complexity in the jet engine, if you look closely in his profile picture, you can actually see a jet engine in the background of his profile picture that was taken in the foyer of the Qantas office. But he did tell me that there was nothing in there, that it was just a shell of a jet engine. But another news, his wife was awarded a PhD last week, which he was definitely very proud, as they now have a doctor in the house. So without further ado, I'd like to hand this over now to David Hockridge. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone. My name is David Hockridge, coming to you from Sydney today, and I'm going to be talking about UTS's learning experience with planning analytics for planning, and some of our operational experiences and what you may be able to learn from that as well. Share my presentation. Okay, so we're going to be taking a bit of a walking tour through UTS's experiences with planning analytics this morning, and also at the same time a bit of a walking tour through some of the interesting building architecture at UTS at the same time. Our first stop on the tour is a little bit about UTS. You may or may not be familiar with us, so we'll just cover a little bit about who we are and what we do. The second stop, why do we use planning analytics? What do we use it for? Our third stop will be some of our operational experiences, what didn't go so well for us, what went well for us. And the fourth stop, some learnings which maybe you can take away that may be useful for you in your journey as well. So our first stop here, you can see the picture is actually UTS's beautiful reading room where people can go and read and study. University of Technology Sydney is a public university focused on technology, and we are very committed to our support for the economic, social and cultural prosperity of our communities. We measure ourselves by the success of our students, our staff and our partners, and we're committed to research, innovation and dissemination of knowledge of public value. We have around 45,000 students, which makes us one of the larger universities, of which 12,000 students are international. Across 560 different courses with 2,300 different subjects that students can choose from. And thinking about our research side, according to the Excellence in Research Australia rankings, 100% of our research is rated as world standard or above. And news just last week, we're continuing our steady improvement in the Times Higher Education World University rankings. So we've risen 10 places to 133rd in the world, which represents an increase of 200 places in the last decade. So let's talk now about how UTS uses planning analytics. We've been using the tool for about 6 years now, and we were fairly early on with using planning analytics on cloud. So we've been using it for that whole time. We haven't run the system on-premise at all. We use it for budgeting, reporting and forecasting for finance, which I think is what a lot of people do, so I won't be talking too much about that. But perhaps more uniquely, we do some demand planning, or in our case, it's student load planning. And our student load planning system is used by our planning team, who work in conjunction with faculties to project our student load and set targets for different courses in the different faculties. And that load plan then goes on to inform our finance team in terms of medium and long-term financial plans, and also operationally in terms of what are our student offer targets, like how many student offers do we need to make in order to get the expected number of students into our courses, and also our staff requirements. So as you can imagine, staff requirements vary quite a lot depending on how many students there are in a course or not. There are lots of aspects for load planners to consider when coming up with the load plan. The first of all is how many students are going to start with us in the course and how many are continuing into their second, third, fourth year, and so on. We need to think about capacity limits of some subjects. So some subjects have special equipment and special classrooms, and so we want to optimize the number of students that go into those particular courses. We need to think about the conversion rates of people who apply. So if we get 10,000 applicants, how many students do we actually get out of it? Domestic versus international students is an important consideration, as is the faculty and, of course, the course that people are studying. And then we also divide our courses up into undergraduate, postgraduate, and postgraduate research. So these things roughly correspond to some of the dimensions that are in our model for looking at course plan. There's 4 solution components that are interesting to talk about in terms of load modeling. The first is the course plan itself, which has up to a 10-year projection of load in different courses. That system uses history to forecast the number of continuing students. We use multiple scenarios throughout the planning process to look at different options of what we might do. And we keep a record of the targets for the load in each of the different courses. And from that information, we're able to derive the expected revenue, which in turn can feed into our financial plans. The second component of the solution is what we call the course planners interface, and that gives the faculties online access to see the expected load and the expected revenue for their courses. And they're also able to look at the targets that the system has estimated for them, and they can override their targets based on other knowledge that they may have. The third component is called the intake plan, and that helps us answer the question about whether we will meet the targets or not. And it compares the target and projected load. We can see at any point in time what offers and applications we have. And that allows our admissions team to make some decisions making about the offers that we're making. And then the fourth solution component is the data layer, and we derive all of this information from the UTS data warehouse, which manages data from multiple sources and provides a trusted data set into TM1. So all of this solution is a big leap forward from where we were with Excel. We've got a much more efficient way of managing our entire planning, forecasting, and load monitoring processes. And really that online solution to gather key inputs really engages our faculties and business units much better with the whole planning process. And so if we look at the little comparison of where we were before planning analytics and now with our planning analytics-based model, we've gone from lots of Excel to now a single system where we know what the right version is, a system where it was hard for faculties to participate in the planning, and now they have this online real-time review of the data and ability to agree with targets. We went from having a very limited forward view, perhaps 1 year ahead. Now we have a much more forward-looking system which is able to provide better long-term planning into the distant future. And we've gone from arguments about numbers to a situation where the data is more transparent and trusted. I won't say that there are no arguments about numbers at all anymore, but it's a big improvement on where we were. So that's a student load plan. And at this point, I want to introduce you to one of our famous landmarks, which is well known in Sydney, the UTS Tower. And a lot of the students call it the Jenga Tower because of its resemblance to the Jenga blocks game. And if you haven't seen that before, there's a little picture on the right. I know it leads us into some of our operational experience, and we have had a bit of trouble dating back a few years. So as mentioned, I've been at UTS for 4 years, and I sort of walked into a bit of a troubled situation with TM1, particularly in the 2019 period. We were suffering from poor performance of the system. We were suffering from a system that would lock out inexplicably from time to time, outages and unavailability, and even incorrect data in the system at times, which really impacts on the trust and usefulness of the system. And as you can imagine, frustration is rising, particularly among the finance community, who are trying to get their budgets prepared on time and having to work a lot of extra hours to do it. And that leads to an unhappy chief financial officer. An unhappy CFO leads to an unhappy CIO, which leads to an unhappy me, as it turns out, with the CIO in one of our escalations with IBM commenting that this is our worst application in the UTS application portfolio, which is not a good place to be for a system that's supposed to be helping us plan the future. So how did we pick up the pieces and what was our path to recovery? I think there were really two important streams to it. The first was tuning and robustness improvements that we made ourselves to our financial models. Some important areas were in the security model. There was a lot of unnecessary inefficiency. The robustness of the data load was improved in order to make sure that it was able to handle any glitches in access to the database. And we had a long list of tuning improvements that we worked through, and that improved the situation somewhat. And then at the same time, IBM was making significant improvements to planning analytics on cloud. Significant to those were the planning analytics for Excel performance. It was a relatively new product when we started, and there were certainly performance problems which IBM managed to resolve. The stability of the data gateway, which we rely on, has improved such that we don't have issues with it anymore. There was also some upgrade to TM1 itself, which addressed some of the outages that we were having. And also we could see from the outside that IBM were making operational improvements and maturing in their ability to actually run the system as a cloud service. So back in 2019, we're probably seeing situations where changes would cause something else to break, and we're not seeing that anymore. While we're on this slide, I wanted to point out the picture of the UTS Business School, which is a building designed by architect Frank Gehry. That's affectionately known as the paper bag building because its resemblance to a crumpled up brown paper bag. I like to imagine that we, at this stage, have managed to stuff all those fallen down Jenga blocks into a bag so that they have some kind of structure and some kind of home. But we're not quite there yet in terms of our ability to run the system well. What we were missing was a focused, structured support approach. So we had someone on retainer that we could call if we needed to, but we had no proactive support, and we were suffering as a result. And so we went through a tender process in which we selected CubeWise Managed Services to be our support partner. And some of the things that stood out to us from that evaluation process were the skilled people of CubeWise, their experience, not only with TM1, but running it and running it well. Their flexibility in approach. They came to us with quite a flexible commercial model, which worked for us. And we also like their ability to bring tools such as Pulse to help monitor the environment, which we are using today. And the underlying mantra of wanting us to be successful with TM1 and Planning Analytics stood out to us as well. I remember during the evaluation process, Ben Heinel asking me, what does success look like for you in terms of the managed services? And my answer is that I don't have to worry about TM1 anymore, that it just works. And the picture on this page is UTS Building 11, which houses our Faculty of Engineering and Information Technology. And from the look of it, people around Sydney affectionately know it as the cheese grater because of those open graters on the side. But I think that's a very precise kind of cheese grater that would make some very nice slices. And I think to stretch the metaphor a little bit, that gives us the final piece of our puzzle in terms of a stable TM1 environment. So I want to share a bit about our experiences 1 year in with CubeWise Managed Services. And in that year, the guys came up to speed with our system and people, getting to know us and getting to know our system. One of the things that we were concerned about was the complexity of our student planning model, and would someone new be able to come up to speed with that and support it effectively, and that has been the case. We experienced smooth and quick response to any tickets that we raise, and we also see that proactivity, which we were really missing before because we hadn't engaged anyone to do it. But we see that proactive support from CubeWise engaging us when IBM make changes that might impact us or where we need to take some action. Helping us identify infrastructure and environmental improvements and then making those improvements. Helping us avoid problems through system monitoring, and Pulse has been an important part of that, as has their diligence in keeping an eye on things like disk space and CPU usage and other issues. They helped us clean up the environment. We didn't have proper non-production environments in place, and overall identified a program of improvements recommended to us, which we've been gradually working through. And I'll say the limiting factor in that has been our own time in terms of being able to provide testers and our own business input into those improvements. One of the great improvements, which I've drawn out with the tortoise and the hare, is that actually the TM1 startup time and therefore the restart time has gone from 3 to 4 hours down to around 5 minutes. We've also experienced some proactive engagement with us on optimizing our licenses to make sure that we are not wasting licenses on people who aren't using them, who have left, or just simply don't use the system. I've talked about the two models, the finance model and the student loan planning model. And we are on the verge of launching the split of those two models, which will improve performance for both teams and give us independence in how we change things in each of those modules. And so I've changed my view over the last year of what success looks like. So I've gone from how can we make this TM1 headache go away to actually this is quite a good system. How can we get more value from it? And I look forward to continuing to work with the CubeWise team in future in terms of how we can improve some of the business functionality as well as that underlying operational issues being sorted out. So let's move to our next step of the tour now. And the building in the picture now is the UTS Bon Marché building. And I apologize to anyone who actually speaks French for how I mangled that. The facade of this building is based on the French department store, the Le Bon Marché, which literally can be translated as the good deal. And this actually originally was a department store here on Broadway in Sydney before it was taken over by UTS. And inside here, there are a number of creative studios where all kinds of interesting things happen. Well, let's move on now to some ideas that I think might be helpful for you, some learnings that you might like to take away with you from what I've been talking about this morning. The first of these is don't cheap out on testing and tuning for a major implementation. I would say that we pushed too hard for the Bon Marché implementation of our finance model, and so skipped things like detailed testing and tuning before we launched, and we suffered in performance, stability and accuracy of the system as a result. And that was very much driven by UTS itself trying to get something in quickly to a short deadline at a low cost, and perhaps we cut a few corners there. The second lesson is that IBM have significantly improved planning analytics on cloud. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said maybe think twice before going there, but it's been working quite well for our situation over the last couple of years. So for you, it might be worth another look if you've thought about it or are thinking about it. And then my third point is that good support and advice is important. One of our characteristics is because we are new to TM1 and planning analytics, we don't have a lot of internal technical skill in terms of TM1, and so very much reliant on a partner like CubeWise to help us with that. And we need both the technical and business skills, so someone who understands what we're trying to do with the models, as well as someone who understands the technicalities of how it would be implemented. And I think that's one of the challenges of TM1 is finding that mix of people who have that IT discipline and the idea of a software development life cycle and a change management life cycle, and also a business mindset. I did talk to a consulting organization that I use for other BI and data related initiatives and asked them if they had anyone who could help us on TM1, and they said, no, we don't do that anymore because it was too hard to find people with that right mix of IT discipline and the business mindset. So if you find someone who has that, very much worthwhile pursuing. So that's the end of my free advice for the morning. So our final visit to a bit of a UTS building is our UTS central helix DNA staircase. So you can see the double helix there. And I think we can think of that as if the DNA is the building block of life, there are a number of building blocks of a successful TM1 and Planning Analytics application. And I hope you're learning all about those this morning and throughout the conference today. If you're interested to come and visit us at UTS, on the UTS website, you can find a suggested walking tour, so you can actually go see some of these buildings and some of the other interesting architecture on a walking tour. And also, if you're thinking about continuous learning throughout your life, you might be interested in some postgraduate studies. So I need to put in a little plug there to check out the postgraduate options at UTS, and you may find something that will benefit you. So I'm going to hand over to Ben now to see if there's any questions or if he needs to make one up for me.
Yeah, so we have a few minutes left. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to post it onto the chat now. If not, actually, if you don't mind, David, given that you mentioned that now you have seen the other side of it, you know that you don't have as much issues with TM1 and that you want to see more value out of it. So any particular wish list items or plans that you foresee in TM1 delivering at UTS?
I think a couple of things. One of the things that I've been talking to the finance community about is how we better budget for our people expenses. So connecting the HR information about people and the finance information about people so that we can see from what our organisation structure theoretically looks like through to the actual spend, through payroll, through to the budget. I think joining those up is an important next step for us in the finance world. And in the load planning world, I've talked about the faculty interface to load planning, and I think there's value in us, now that we've used that for, 3 years now, it's good to revisit how that works and get some input back from the faculties about their experience with using that system and look at ways we can improve that. So that would be my two top functional things on the wish list, Ben.
Thank you very much, David.